Okay, thanks everyone for joining our 10th class. And again, if you have a quick question, I'm happy to answer it. Otherwise, you can chat it in the chat box on the bottom. And this is the 10th class. And as you all know, we finished Kings 1 last class for the 9th class, which ended with the death of King Achav. 20 chapters, give or take, in Kings 1 was dedicated to the wicked King Achav and his wicked wife, Queen Jezebel. And a lot happened in that 20 chapters, and it ends with his downfall. Kings 2 opens up with Achav's son, and his name is Achaziah. His name is Achaziah. Let's just go for just one moment. I'm going to share my screen just to, let's see if, do you see this on your screen, guys, the map? Okay, good. So I'm going to open this up for a second. So if you see on my mouse over here, this is Achav. He's row 7 on the Israel side. He's the king of the 10 northern tribes. And Achaziah, which is row 8, begins Kings 2. Now, as you remember, we discussed that it was Jeremiah that wrote the volume of Kings, and it was written as one volume. It was not 2 volumes. It was later for us ADD people that have a hard time listening to more than 45-minute class or reading a long book of 900 pages. So they broke it down, right? It's hard to read a book, Harry Potter, 800 pages. You break it down a little bit, it becomes a little bit easier. So they did the same thing with the book of Kings, and Kings 2, which is really all part of one volume, Kings, begins with Achav's son, Achaziah. So this is where we are discussing in this era over here. So this is, you do the math of how many kings and how many years they reigned for. You do the math, and that's what we're holding right now, Achav's son, Achaziah. I'm stopping my stop share. And now we're back to me here. So it opens up with a very interesting story over here with Achaziah, and that is that he was a wicked idol worshiper. Now, again, we use the term wicked a little bit loosely. Today, like if someone wicked worships idols, we call them wicked. But in those days, you know, it was hard to call everybody wicked who worshipped idols, because pretty much everybody did those days. So I'm using the term wicked a bit loosely. So in any case, it opens up with Achaziah he falls down a rooftop. It actually says he falls down a lattice roof, like off a sukkah, and he falls to the ground. And he sends his scouts, his servants, to some gods in Ekron. It's in Israel, but these are certain idols that people at the time worshipped. And it was told to Elijah by a voice from above that you should go and confront these messengers, the messengers of King Achaziah. And sure enough, they meet on the road, and Elijah tells these few servants, you know, these knights, and says, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're going to beseech from the god of Ekron healing, and you know, refuah shlema, a total complete healing for our King Achaziah." And Elijah says, "Don't you know what I did at Mount Carmel? Didn't you not see all the miracles that I've done on behalf of God and the Jewish people? You go back and you tell your King Achaziah that Elijah disapproves of what he's doing." So to their credit, they go back to the king, the powerful King Achaziah, and they say, "We met Elijah, and he said that we're crazy. We shouldn't be doing something like this. It's a prohibition." So the king sends 50 military mighty soldiers, a whole battalion, to basically kill Elijah the prophet. Elijah's on the top of a particular mountain, and at the bottom of the mountain, he sees this battalion of 50 soldiers with the commander, and he screams, "What are you doing?" And they say, "You better come down at once. And Elijah says, don't you know what I'm powerful, what I'm capable of doing, what I did at Mount Carmel? And he kills all the 50 soldiers by a ball of fire with the commander. It was a great miracle. Word goes back to King Achaziah, and Achaziah sends another 50 soldiers with a commander. They come back to this foot out, not the foot of Sinai, but a foot of some other particular mountain that Elijah is hanging out. And the same thing happens. Elijah kills the second group of 50. Achaziah sends a third group. Again, this is all recorded at the opening of Book of Kings, Kings 2. Achaziah, the king, sends a third group. And this time the commander, who is not a dummy, he knows Elijah, just like he killed the first two groups, can kill them as well. So he pleads with Elijah and says, please have mercy on me. Please don't kill me and my 50 people. So Elijah says, go in peace, don't worry about it. And you're off, and I will approach Achaziah myself. Elijah comes himself. Miraculously, no one's hurting him. And he warns Achaziah of his misdeeds. And he says, basically, you're going to die. Your family's going to die for trying to play games with God. And within a few days, Achaziah dies. And King Ahab's younger son, Yerovam, takes over. So that is the end of this little episode of this back and forth between Elijah and Achaziah. Achaziah's younger brother becomes the new king, the mighty, powerful new king of the 10 northern tribes. And that ends it. Now, God tells Elijah, the end has come for you, and it's time for you to go and return to the heavens. And Elijah knows that this is going to be a very interesting death. He knows through prophecy that he's not going to be buried in the ground like Moses and everybody else. This is going to be the first and only time that a person, when they died, not only their soul returns to heaven, but their body as well. And this is what happens. And this is the story, again, that's being recorded in chapter 3 of Kings. First, Elijah tells his student Elisha, I don't want you to follow me, because Elijah was being humble. He didn't want Elisha to see this great honor that's going to happen for him. Elisha says, over my dead body, I'm not going to abandon you now. And Elijah thinks that this moment of spiritual and physical, of his body returning up to heaven, is going to happen in the town of Gilgal. Let me go back to my share screen. Give me a minute. I'm just going to go back up to the map. Okay, this is the land of Israel. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. This is Gilgal. You see my mouse? Can you see my mouse over here? Okay. As you see here, this is the Jordan River, this blue strip. This is the River Jordan, the Jordan River. This is Judah down here. Remember Elijah? We said Eliyahu Hagiladi, Eliyahu Hatishbi. He comes from the tribe of God, Transjordan. That's really where Elijah comes from. Anyways, he thought that this moment of his returning, his death, is going to happen in the town of Gilgal, because that's where Joshua, that's where everything happened when the Jews came into the promised land. But God says, no, I want you to go to Beit El. I think that's it. Actually, no, that's I. Oh, there's Beit El right there. There's my mouse. There's my mouse right there, Beit El. And so he goes to Beit El. Elisha's following him. There's many other students in Beit El that Elijah had who told Elisha, don't you know that today your master Elijah is going to die? And Elisha says, shh, I know, shh. In Beit El, God tells him, I want you to go to Jericho. So he travels to Jericho with Elisha in tow. This is, again, I'm just repeating the exact history of what happened in the book of Kings. And it's there that God tells him, no, it's not going to happen in Jericho, but I want you to go into the Jordan River. So Elijah wasn't sure if his student Elisha could come with him into the Jordan River to see what's going to happen to him and how he's going to die. So Elijah takes his coat and he puts it on the waters of this Jordan River, right? And he figures if it's going to make a split in the Jordan River for only one corridor, for one path, that means it's going to be me. If it's going to be enough space for two paths, then it's going to be for me and for my student Elisha, because he just simply wasn't sure if Elisha should be coming with him as well. And sure enough, Elijah takes his coat. It's like, Moses had the staff, Elijah had a coat. He puts it on the Jordan River, and sure enough, it splits and makes a split for two pathways, enough for two people to come through. And they both go a good few hundred meters into the Jordan River. So everyone thinks, God only made a miracle once at the splitting of the Red Sea, but actually he did it a few times, the splitting of the Red Sea. He split the Jordan River for Joshua to come into the land of Israel. And now we have it for the third time of Elijah splitting the Jordan River, because in the middle of the Jordan River is where there's going to be this return. So of the return of Elijah to its maker. So they're now in the middle of the Jordan River. The water closed behind them. Now there's a bunch of maybe dozens of prophets, of Elijah's students who are prophets themselves, who saw and witnessed Elijah and Elisha go into the Jordan River. The waters are closed behind, so they can't see them anymore. And Elisha tells his master, Elijah, I want to witness this moment. I want to see what's going to happen. So Elijah is like, he's not sure of what to make of this. He himself is unsure what's going to happen. And Elijah tells Elisha, look, this is pretty much on my deathbed, as it were. Ask me anything you want and I'll try to grant it for you. So Elisha says, I want double the power as what my master had. So Elijah says, double the power is what I have. That's what you want. That's quite a request. And the commentaries say it wasn't that Elisha was being haughty, that he wanted to be greater than Elijah. Rather, Elisha knew that with this depreciation of the spirituality of the Jewish people, being surrounded and infested with idol worship, Elisha knew he's going to need more power than Elijah to counter all the idol worship and all the misdeeds of the Jewish people. So that's why he was requesting for more power. That gives a little bit flavor to why he asked for more power than Elijah. Elijah says, listen, I don't know if I can give you double the power, but what I will tell you is like this. If you witness what's going to happen in just a moment of how I'm going to return to my maker, then your wish is going to be granted. And if you don't see how I return to my maker, then I guess God doesn't want you to have that kind of power. At that very moment, a chariot of fire and horses and fire in the form of horses. So you have a ball of fire, but it's in the form of a chariot and horses. And immediately it gallops and it separates Elijah and Elisha. And this chariot and these horses consume and take the body of Elijah, and it goes away. And Elisha, the student, is now in the Jordan River alone. And he's crying, Master, Master, literally crying. The only thing he has left from his master Elijah is the coat that Elijah just used a moment ago to split the Jordan River. He takes that coat and he rips it, like, when you sit Shiva, he rips it a little bit because he's sitting Shiva now for his master. And after he finishes crying and he's saying Father 3 times, he then takes the coat and he puts it on the water and it splits so that Elijah now can go back to the banks of the Jordan River by Jericho. And that counts as one of the miracles that Elisha did, that he split the Jordan River like his master Elijah did. There's a great debate in the Talmud. What does this really mean? Bottom line, we live in 2021. What does this really mean? So again, when you read this in the Kabbalah, you don't question it, because the Zohar, the Kabbalah, it lives in the world of the higher worlds. But when we're reading the books of Kings, you have to grapple with this a little bit. So the Talmud indeed debates this and asks, is there some place where a body can actually go Is there some secret physical place in heaven? And they're discussing this. And they're discussing this because of this episode of what happened to Elijah. And some people say, no, of course not. There's no bodies in heaven. Only souls are in heaven. So what does this mean? His body was consumed. It means the body was so refined and so spiritually elevated that it became onto a level of a soul. And just like the soul returned spiritually to the heavens, the body also did. But it's not a body, a physical body that we have kidneys and lungs and everything else. It's a physical body the way you understand the way a soul is. That's what returned. And some people say, no, there's a secret place. Okay, but that's a discussion. So Elisha now comes back. He's now on the banks of the Jordan River on the Israel side. And the students who are also prophets say, Elisha, where is our master Elijah? And Elisha says, you're not going to find him. So they immediately set out for a search and rescue team to go look for Elijah. And Elisha says, I'm telling you, you're not going to find him. And after 3 days of them taking boats and looking in mountains and looking here and looking there, they indeed gave up and they said, we don't know where he is. And Elisha says, I told you so, and that's it. And Elisha basically is, I don't want to use the word coronated because that's for kings, but he's basically designated as the next leader and spiritual leader of the Jewish people, Elisha. Let me go back to my share screen just for a moment. Okay, I don't know if you can see this, but you do have it in your syllabus. So I'm going to read it from the top. In summation, Elijah the prophet performed 8 miracles. Again, he's in parentheses. I'm just reading off the screen. Eliyahu Hanavi Hatishbi. Some say he was Pinchas, others say he was a student of Achia Hashiloni, but this is the Elijah that we've been talking about. So if we kept count of all the miracles that he did based on my past few classes, you'll know that Elijah did 8 miracles. And let's just go through it. And a lot of these miracles you already know. Number 1, during King Ahab's time, Elijah decreed rain should stop falling and famine ensued. By the way, these are my notes. It's not high-end English or vocabulary, but these are my notes. Number 2, he made a small amount of oil for the widow to last her till the end of the famine. He revived the dead son of the widow. He brought down the fire at Mount Carmel. He brought back rain after that episode of Mount Carmel, if you remember. Number 6, he walked 40 days to Mount Sinai without drinking. And that's where God, if you remember, reapproached him and said, why are you bad-mouthing the Jewish people? And that's when he told them, you're going to have to come to every circumcision, like we discussed in last class. And in the book of Kings 2, which is what we're beginning with tonight, you have 2 more miracles, which is twice he brought a fire that burned the officers of the king of Achaziah and the commanding officer. And number 8, he split the Jordan River. Now, since Elisha said, I want to have double what you had, and he was granted that wish because he saw the chariot of fire and horses, so Elisha had double the miracles that he performed, which is 16 miracles. I'm not going to go through all the miracles now because we didn't discuss it, but definitely we can go through some. Number 1, Elisha split the Jordan River to return to Israel. Number 2, Elisha, we're not going to go through this in detail because we have a lot more to get to on the 10 tribes. So I'm just going to go through some of these quickly. Elisha cured the waters at Jericho. There was some poisonous water wells and he cured him. Elisha had a forest with bears appear and devour 42 students who were making fun of him. Number 4, Elisha provided water for the 3 kings in the desert. He caused oil to flow from a jug containing only a drop of oil. Same thing, he granted a certain particular Shunammite woman a son. That son died. Miracle 7 is he revived the son, and so on and so forth. So these are 16 miracles in total that Elisha did. Okay. I'm going to go back to the map. I'm hoping that you have this page after the 16 miracles. Alan, I don't know if you have it where it says on the chapter 8. You have this. Take a look if you have this page. This page of chapter 8, verse 25. If you have it, great. I'm just going to scroll to the king's chart for just a moment.
Yes, have it.
Okay, so I'm going to read off this piece of paper that I printed out, but I'm going to be looking at on my screen this chart of the kings. So in chapter 8 of I just want to kind of go through some of these rows here. On chapter 8 of Kings, verse 25, it states, in the 12th year of Jehoram's son Achav, who was the king of Israel, Achaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, became king. And Achaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 1 year in Jerusalem. I'm just showing you from this verse how this chart is somewhat cued and built, because in the 12th year of Jehoram, son of Achav, so Jehoram is this, row 9. They call it Joram, but it's Jehoram. So in the 12th year of Jehoram, son of Achav, Achaziah, that's row 8, Achaziah, the son of, no, this side, Achaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, that's in row 6, became king. So these verses, every once in a while, is sprinkled throughout the book of Kings, lets us build this chart. And Achaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 1 year in Jerusalem. That's why row 6, he was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 1 year. Let's do another example. Let's look at the next paragraph. Let's just do chapter 17. In the 12th year of Achaz, king of Judah, so this is Achaz, king of Judah, row 12 on the Judah side. In the 12th year of King Achaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, son of Elah, became king over Israel. So this is Hoshea, row 19, became king over Israel in Samaria, and he reigned for 9 years. So this chart, again, is not just, just a Google splash. This is really based on a lot of these chapters and verses. Anyways, Hoshea is the last king, and this is important for our discussion about the 10 tribes. Hoshea is the last king of the Israel northern tribes. He reigned for 9 years. Alan, if you do the math on this right side of all these kings and you count their days, it doesn't quite come close to the kings of Judah and all of their years. 40 years, 52 years, 16, Manasseh, 55 years if you're following my mouse. So what happened over here, Alan? In 722 BC, so you're talking almost 200 years before the fall of the destruction of the temple, of the first temple, which takes place in 586 BCE, almost 200 years prior, the 10 northern tribes stopped. Row 19, Alan, King Hoshea is the last king of the northern tribes. And you see here, he reigned from the year 732 BCE to 712 BCE. And he reigned for 9 years, and he was the last king of the northern tribes. What happened? As you see back in that paper that I printed out, chapter 17, verse 6, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and exiled Israel to Assyria. He settled them in Hala, Habor, and the cities of Media. So this king of Assyria, and that's why they call this here the yellow box, the Assyrian captivity. Not quite sure who this Assyrian king was, but it does say his name is Sancherib, if that makes a difference to you. Or another word that they give him is Tiglath-Pileser, or Sancherib, are different nicknames that we give to this Assyrian king, Alan. And this king was responsible for the death and basically the exiles and the stop of the furtherance of Jewry of the 10 northern tribes. And Hoshea was the last one. So although Hoshea was the last king in 732 BCE, the Jewish people still flourished and still were a strong community over here on the Judah side of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. Shira and Larry, does that make sense? I see I'm losing you. I don't mean to disturb you. Don't let me stop you. So the point is that on the Assyrian side, remember, let's take this back a moment. You have, as we discussed, the split of Israel. There was not a civil war, but there was a split of Israel. You had the 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and you had the 10 tribes. The 10 tribes were on the north, and you had Judah and Benjamin, which was in the middle of Israel. As you saw in that chart, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin had constant kings, and they reigned for a certain amount of years, and they were replaced either by a son-in-law, and so forth. On the north, you had the 10 northern tribes. They also had their capital, which was Samaria, and they had their kings. And they reigned for a number of years, as you saw in that chart I just showed you. The last king of the 10 northern tribes, his name was Hoshea. So 200 years before the destruction of the temple, before the destruction of King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, these 10 tribes who were living in the north and around Samaria, they already began to be exiled or killed by the Assyrian king in the year 722 BCE. As the verse I just read to you in chapter 17, verse 6, Hoshea was the last king of the northern tribes. And it states in chapter 17, verse 6, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. I'm quoting for you. He captured Samaria and exiled Israel to Assyria. And he settled them in all these different places outside the land of Israel. So this is an ultimate exile. But he was even smarter than that, this king of Assyria. You know what he did even more than that? He actually brought non-Jews from those outside countries, and he brought them and had them settle in the land of Israel. So they brought their own culture, they brought their own language, they brought their own food. So with this king of Assyria, really did a number on the Jewish people. It's not like, he murdered 10,000 people and then he left, like most kings do when they want to fight the enemy. They murder the enemy, they kill an enemy, they burn down the palace, and then they leave. It's like what we did in Afghanistan. We destroyed the Taliban and Kabul, and we destroyed, I'm not getting into politics, I'm just saying, like, it's a typical behavior. We destroyed them, we toppled their Capitol Hill and their courthouses, and then America leaves. But the ideology of these Afghans and their culture remains intact. Let's say hypothetically, we would bring into Kabul and to the whole Afghanistan 100 million Chinese, 100 million Americans, 100 million Russians, and they settle in Kabul, in Afghanistan. Then there's no more Afghanistan. There's no more culture. It's over. So that's what this king of Assyria did to bring such a heavy exile to these 10 northern tribes. He didn't just kill them. He brought these outside Goyim, non-Jews, to live in Samaria. He also let many Jews live in the northern tribes, but he also brought in many other people. What happened was, there's an interesting miracle that lions, like we have, let's say, mosquitoes, or we have coyotes that come over here off the hills, the Hollywood Hills. So there they had lions, and these lions kept on coming and attacking these people, these non-Jews that were living in Samaria, in Israel, which was somewhat of a miracle, So a lot of the Jewish people were saying to the non-Jews, look, you're in our land of Israel, but you're not really acting Jewish. You have to convert to Judaism, act Jewish, and God won't be upset, and hopefully these lions will go away. And actually, that's what happened. Many of them converted, became friendly with their Jewish neighbors. You know where the term the Good Samaritan comes from? From this very episode. These people were living in Samaria, and they were called the Good Samaritans. It dates all the way back from this time. because they were living in Samaria, they were being good. The Talmud refers to these converts as Gerim Arayas. Gerim, converts. Arayas means lions. They were lion converts because of this episode of these miracles of these lions. So were these converts considered kosher converts? The debate. Some say there was not, especially with the beginning in the times of Solomon when people were coming to convert. It was very problematic, as we discussed before, because were they converting for, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of God? Or were they converting because they just didn't want lions to attack them? Or were they converting because they wanted some of King Solomon's money? So there's always questions. That's why Jewish people till today are hypersensitive when it comes to conversion. Even me, when someone comes to me for a conversion, I say, listen, I can't answer that. I'm in the Jewish outreach business. I'm not in the conversion business. You have to go to specialists because I, Mendel's words, don't want to take it upon myself. It's a very sensitive discussion. I'm not saying that we don't have converts. We have a Jewish law that allows to have converts. But what's considered a kosher convert is people always questioning it. So the Good Samaritan or the Geir Marayas, the good converts. So this comes from this episode. So let me explain that there were 3 stages of exile that happened over here in the northern tribes. And there were also 3 stages of exile that happened in the tribes of Judah and Benjamin 200 years later. So let's first discuss the first exile with the 10 northern tribes. The first exile, as it were, the exile of the 10 tribes, which later became the lost 10 tribes, is in chapter 15 of Kings 2, verse 29. And I quote, during King Pekach, which was the king prior to Hosea. Remember, we said the last king on your syllabus, on your chart of kings, on the king of Israel, the last one is Hosea. So the king prior to him is Pekach, and already in his time, many Jewish people were already being exiled. So he was this, what's the English word? A vassal king for this Assyrian king. This was guy Pekach, and already people were being exiled then. Now, the tribe of Naphtali was exiled by Sancheriv, by this Assyrian king. So the tribe of Naphtali was the first tribe that was basically migrated and was removed from this land of Israel to Assyria. What was the name of this Assyrian king? His name was Sancheriv. Next was Reuven and Gad. Now, Reuven and Gad, if you remember on your chart, they were the second exile. Let me just share my screen for a moment, guys. So Hosea was the last king. This is Hosea over here. Row 19. Row 18, already the exile already began by that guy by the name of Sancheriv. Who was the first tribe to be exiled? I'm just going to my map. The tribe of Naphtali, right over here. This was the first tribe to be exiled to Assyria. I'm not sure if Assyria was over here at that time. Again, this map. It's over a span of a few hundred years. It's hard for me to figure out where Assyria is. Okay, the next group was Reuven and Gad. Here is Reuven and here is Gad. These are the next 2 tribes to be on the chopping block. Okay. And there's Naphtali up on top there. And the third exile was that verse of the Assyrian king in the 9th year of Hosea's reign. He came and he actually sacked Samaria. And not only did he kill and migrate and exile even more Jews, but like I say, he brought non-Jews into Samaria, into the land of Israel. And that was the ultimate doom for the Jewish people as far as exiles go. And they were literally completely lost, either because they migrated or because you simply didn't know the difference between Jew and Gentile. So that was the third exile, which takes place in 722 BCE. Now, the Talmud again discusses these 10 lost tribes Are they lost forever? Or perhaps in the year 2021, they may appear. Or maybe they'll appear in 100 years from now. Or maybe they'll reappear when Mashiach comes. What does this mean that they're gone? Because the verse says in verse 18, none of the tribes remained except the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. None of the tribes remained, so they're lost forever. What does that verse mean in verse 18? That none remained. And is it permanent or is it temporary? So again, the Talmud in Sanhedrin, volume Sanhedrin, page 110, has two opinions. It's very interesting. Rabbi Akiva, the famous Rabbi Akiva, who became a Baal Tshuva at the age of 40 years old, Rabbi Akiva says the exile of these 10 tribes that happened in those days was permanent. They are lost forever. So when I see people on Venice Beach and they say they come from the tribe of Manasseh, I know that it can't be true because Rabbi Akiva said the 10 lost tribes are lost forever. However, Rabbi Eliezer, he's the second opinion, and he says they will be restored. The 10 tribes will be restored when Mashiach comes, and we'll have once again 12 tribes. Rabbi Akiva says no, only 2 tribes will remain because those 10 lost tribes are done. Now, Rashi, who's a great commentator of the Talmud, he actually qualifies the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, who said that the 10 lost tribes are forever. So Rashi says Rabbi Akiva is only referring to that generation that was exiled. They will be lost forever. But their children and grandchildren who were lost maybe with them, or who migrated 50 years later, or were exiled 50 years later, they will not be lost forever. It's only temporary. They will once again come back. So when we say that, according to Rashi, that is, that the 10 other tribes will come back, doesn't mean the souls of those original 10 tribes that, let's say, were punished. But their grandchildren will come back, but they themselves will not come back. But on face value, we have Rabbi Akiva that says they're lost forever. There'll be no more 10 tribes. It's just the 2 tribes left of Judah, Benjamin, of course, the Levites and the Kohanim. And then we have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that says, no, only that generation was lost. But one day it will come back. We will do some DNA testing, or Mashiach himself with Elijah will help us figure it out, and we'll have all the 12 tribes once again. Okay, either way, I just wanted to just touch upon this 10 lost tribes. But as to when it happened in 722 BCE. People think, it happened at the end of the Second Temple when the Romans came and they destroyed the Second Temple. That's all talking about the people of Judah. When the Romans came and destroyed the Second Temple, it was only the tribe of Judah and Benjamin that was left during the Second Temple era. The only Jews living in Jerusalem or in Israel stemmed from the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. There was already no more 10 tribes. Some people say even when the Jews came back to rebuild the Second Temple, it was only the Judah people and the Benjamites that rebuilt the Second Temple. The 10 tribes were so lost, they didn't even make it back to rebuild the Second Temple. But certainly 400 years later, when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, there's no more discussion about the 10 tribes of the north. There is no 2 palaces anymore, one in Samaria and one in Jerusalem. So it's important to remember the 10 lost tribes and the exile, and there were 3 stages of exile, as I explained. First, the tribe of Naphtali, then Reuben and Gad, and then third, the entire Samaria was sacked. And even more so, the converts came, and the converts weren't necessarily bad. We call them the Good Samaritans. That was the third exile. But already by the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, it was all over. Okay, so that discusses the exiles of the 10 tribes. Now I just want to have a few minutes left. Let's just discuss Jerusalem with Judah and Benjamin and its destruction. So you have, let me go back to my share screen. So you have over here, again, this was Hosea, the last of the kings of the Israel, the 10 northern tribes on the right side. And that, again, is the fall of Israel by the Assyrian captivity. And at this point, now you have Chizkiah or Chizkiyahu, which is row 13. And this is what we call the water tunnels, which I went myself in Jerusalem, the Chizkiah water tunnels. Make sure you put it on your tour, row 13. I was very excited when I went because, of course, I studied my prophets and my history, and it discusses there about him digging and having all these water tunnels because this Assyrian king tried to sack Jerusalem and lay siege onto Jerusalem. And Chizkiah did a lot of different things of stuffing up certain water wells outside the Jerusalem walls. And he also made other water tunnels that can feed water and other foods and provisions into Jerusalem. And that's all here, Chizkiah water tunnels. A lot of amazing things happened over here. We can't go through, of course, every single king here. Some kings were good, some kings were bad. You had different prophets, like you see here on the side, that was navigating and advising the Jewish kings of Judah and Benjamin at this time. Until finally, we have over here Tzidkiah, which is really Tzidkiyahu. It says over here, Tzidkiah was bad. You know, from what I read, he wasn't quite so bad. Again, we use the word bad because maybe he did some idols. Another thing I just want to just go back for a moment to Chizkiah. He also did something very good, and we have a holiday actually till today in 2021 because of him, and that's the holiday of Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, the 15th of Leo, which we celebrated just, I think, 2 weeks ago, give or take. It's because he removed all these mini altars leading up to Jerusalem and all over the place, where people brought sacrifices everywhere and anywhere, which was against Jewish law. And because he removed these bamos, these mini altars, and this happened on the 15th of Av, so it became also another national holiday that the Jewish people returned to God and atoned and things like that. So that's Chizkiah. I mean, a lot of beautiful stories about Manasseh, a lot of spiritual things and miracles happened. Again, we can't go through all of them. We just have to now run to Tzidkiah. And he actually, why we call him bad is because he didn't listen to Jeremiah. Remember, Jeremiah was a person that wrote the entire book of Kings as a diary. Jeremiah said to surrender to the Babylonian kings who are on the verge, because Jeremiah already heard from God that the temple is going to be destroyed. And Tzidkiah, to his credit or to his discredit, started to align himself with the Egyptian king, the Egyptian pharaohs, and trying to overtake the Babylonians and to defend himself. And Jeremiah is telling him, it's not going to happen. God already told me that this temple is coming down. And now's the time to do teshuvah and to repent and to daven. And Tzidkiah wouldn't hear anything of it. He felt that under his watch as the king of King Solomon's temple, there's just no way he's going to surrender. And he did not surrender, and it turned very ugly and gory. And that is the story of Tzidkiah. And it ended not so nicely for him with his death. And ultimately, on the 7th of Av, the fires and the destructions began, and the majority of the temple was ultimately destroyed on the 9th of Av. And that's why we commemorate till today, the 9th of Av. Now, what's interesting is there's still tens of thousands of Jews still living in Jerusalem. So they put in place Gedaliah. Gedaliah was not a king, but he was basically the leader, but on behalf of the Babylonian monarchy, to be the leader of the Jewish people in Israel. Eventually, he was assassinated by his own people, which is like the first time that the Jewish people themselves did a coup and killed their own. And that's why till today, the day after Rosh Hashanah, we have Tzum Gedaliah, the fast of Gedaliah. So I just want to finish with, we have to be somewhat sensitive when we speak about these episodes in the stories of the prophets, about people going astray and not being devout. Again, we have to remember, the addiction of idol worship in those days, we simply do not understand it. And as a result of all the idol worship, God counted it with having hundreds and hundreds of prophets. There's 54 prophets that we speak about, 48 male prophets and another 7 female prophets or prophetess. We have, I'm not going to list them all, but we have a total of 54 prophets. And these prophets and hundreds of others were to counter, like I said before with Elisha, a lot of those prophets and students were telling Elisha, your master's going to die. They were prophets. And this was to counter all the idol worship that was happening in those days. These were people that did believe in God. They did study Torah. But again, it was simply the idol worship that kind of kept on dragging them till ultimately, you should know, and we'll discuss this in the next class, that there was, I have to research it, but there was, maybe Mordechai or Nehemiah or Daniel. They basically davened and prayed to God to stop the addiction of the Jewish people being so enamored with idol worship. And eventually God agreed and removed idol worship and this addiction from the Jewish people towards this idol worship. But God also removed prophecy. He also removed these miracles and prophets, which was only there in the first place to counter all of that. So I guess it's a yin and a yang. It comes, you can't just pick pieces out of a salad. So that's pretty much what happens during the times of the Second Temple. There's going to be a lot of less idol worship. There's also going to be a lot of less prophets and miracles, which either you can say is a good thing or a bad thing. So that'll be up to the reader. I just want to finish with Rav Ashi, who was a person who codified the Talmud. And he said once that Manasseh, who was a Jewish king of Judah, who reigned for 55 years, and he belittled him in his class one day when he was giving a Torah study class. Rav Ashi, it's recorded, Rav Ashi says, I had a dream that Manasseh came to me and said, you don't know the first thing about me. You don't know the first thing about me. And he started to teach Rav Ashi, who was the master of Talmud, all this Talmud and all these teachings of Torah. And he was far superior in the Torah and its knowledge, way more than Rav Ashi, who was the rabbi of the time during this era, during this Roman era. So again, we really don't have a handle when we say that this person didn't walk in the ways of God, or they walked in the ways of Yeravam, who was in opposition towards God and things like that. We have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because we really don't understand how things were operating and working thousands of years ago. So I'll finish with that. I'll stop the recording, and you guys can ask me anything you want.